welcome to the First Unitarian Church. It's really feels good to come together as a community today in light of a very, very difficult week. The devastating earthquake in Nepal has called upon the world's need to exercise compassion and generosity. We have looked on rather helplessly with great sorrow as the death toll continues to rise daily, tempered by occasional joy when life miraculously emerges after many days beneath the rubble. We grow impatient with the length of time it takes to deliver help to that mountainous region. And the ground shook in Baltimore this week after the long history of police oppression finally erupted with yet another unwarranted death of an African-American citizen, this time was actually in police custody. Why has justice been so slow to arrive in that city? Some joy emerged, however, from the streets of Baltimore when a young black woman prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby, announced that she would prosecute 6 police officers in the death of Freddie Gray. She drew sharp criticism from those who accuse her of moving too quickly and pursuing a political agenda. What, pray tell, has been the agenda until now? Symbol of light and of knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. May we open up our service this morning with a hymn which is actually considered to be the African American national anthem. And the reason I chose this was that simply we can feel some unity with our brothers and sisters in Baltimore and in all of the inner cities around the country. Hymn number 149. Bill Clinton once boasted he's the only white man in America to know that hymn by heart. That's maybe right. And if Hillary's smart, she better start memorizing a few verses. Baltimore, the city of Baltimore has always had an interesting weave in the context of my own family. My mother's mother never escaped the horrors of Nazi Germany, but her two brothers did. One of the brothers, my mother's uncle Walter Mendelsohn, settled in New York City after coming in through the port of New Orleans. And the other uncle, Uncle Felix Mendelsohn, ended up in Baltimore and raised his family there in Baltimore. Felix was a very accomplished cellist, and at least he played in Berlin, and was very fortunate, he felt, to find a position at the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra when he immigrated here to the States. He was a pretty affable guy, and his English was coming along quite well, that he took on another assignment while he was in Baltimore, and that was to host a radio program where they listened to some music, and he'd have guests, and he'd have some conversation. And it kind of reminds me of, for those of you who may remember here on KWR, the old days when Gene Pack and Rick Nobis had their classical music program. But Uncle Felix had classical music, he had some jazz, and one day, this program must have been, I'm trying to pinpoint, it must have been about 1947. He had an African American in his studio that he was interviewing, they were listening to some music. Well, it was during that broadcast that the radio manager, producer, broke in and stopped it. I mean, he lost his job, and it wasn't like, don't bother showing up tomorrow. It was stopped right there on the air, and he was out. Felix took his own life shortly after that, didn't leave a note, but the family would sometimes discuss what could have been that led to such utter despair. He left a 12-year-old girl, his daughter, and the discussion kind of revolved around the idea that it was simply overwhelming for him to leave one country which had so dehumanized a group of people, a specific race or group, only to arrive in another country where much of the same viciousness continued. It was a factor, I'm sure, among many. And so Baltimore has always been rather on my radar, on the family radar. I remember discussing, as I was growing up, with Uncle Felix's daughter, my cousin, about life in Baltimore. And she would always shake her head, and she'd say, you know, and I quote now, this is going back to the 50s, she'd say, the Negro always knew his place in Baltimore. That Baltimore made sure that the Negro knew his place. And so once again, so Baltimore has always been kind of a mixed thing for me. And so it is a very personal thing in a way that Baltimore has finally erupted this past week. And as the streets of Baltimore did kind of explode, President Obama, at a press conference, was asked to comment on the situation. And he had a lot to say. One of his comments that I thought was perhaps the most penetrating of all was when he said that the police would have to do some soul searching. And they said we all need to do some soul searching. He said the whole country needs to do some soul searching. And I thought, what does soul searching really mean? For one thing, soul searching is not problem solving. The president did not intend for the police or any of us to come up with a solution. He asked for soul searching. Perhaps the meaning of soul searching is tied more to awakening, mindfulness, becoming aware of what in society is so disturbing to our human sense of fairness. Soul searching may ask us to come to terms with our own complicity in the suffering of others. Perhaps soul searching means living closer to the heart and thereby noticing the suffering in the world. O Spirit of life and love, may we enlarge our compassion and nurture our minds. May heart and head unite and expand our ability to see the truth, to proclaim the truth, and to act upon what is true. We remember at this time all whose lives are less fortunate than our own. We would be strengthened in the time ahead to find ways, great and small, to bring kind words, gentle hands, sincere thoughts to all those lives we touch. And may the Spirit of life, the Spirit of peace, the Spirit of joy dwell within us and guide us. Amen. I'd like to share a parable with you this morning. On a dangerous seacoast where shipwrecks often occur, there was once a crude little life-saving station. The building was just a hut, and there was only one boat, but the few devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea, and with no thought for themselves, went out day and night, tirelessly searching for the lost. Many lives were saved by this wonderful little station, so that it became famous. Some of those who were saved and various others in the surrounding area wanted to become associated with the station and give of their time and money and effort for the support of its work. New boats were bought, new crews trained. The little life-saving station grew. Some of the members of the life-saving station were unhappy that the building was so crude and poorly equipped. They felt that a more comfortable place should be provided as the first refuge of those saved from the sea. So they replaced the emergency cots with beds and put better furniture in the enlarged building. Now, the life-saving station became a popular gathering place for its members, and they decorated it beautifully and furnished it exquisitely, because they used it as a sort of club. Fewer members were now interested in going to sea on life-saving missions, so they hired lifeboat crews to do this work. The life-saving motif still prevailed in this club's decoration, and there was a liturgical lifeboat in the room where the club initiations were held. About this time, a large ship was wrecked off the coast, and the hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, and half-drowned people. They were dirty and sick, and some of them had black skin and some had yellow skin. The beautiful new club was in chaos. So the property committee immediately had a shower house built outside the club where victims of shipwreck could be cleaned up before coming inside. At the next meeting, there was a split in the club membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities as being unpleasant and a hindrance to the normal social life of the club. Some members insisted upon life-saving as their primary purpose and pointed out that they were still called a life-saving station. But they were finally voted down and told that if they want to save the lives of the various kinds of people who were shipwrecked in those waters, they could begin their own life-saving station down the coast. And they did. As the years went by, the new station experienced the same changes that had occurred in the old. It evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station was founded. And history continued to repeat itself, and if you visit that seacoast today, you will find quite a number of exclusive clubs along that shore. Shipwrecks are frequent in those waters. Most of the people drown. One of the traditions of our congregation here is to welcome not only each other, but new people who are here for the very first time so that they can be spared that devastating situation of having coffee alone. Ooh. And so in order to identify those who are here for the first time, so we can share a cup of coffee with you and get to know you better, I would ask if you would please stand so we can just see who you are and catch up with you later. Wonderful. Thank you and welcome. Welcome very much. Thank you. We have a wonderful welcoming table right across from where the coffee is served, and thanks so much for being with us this morning. I hope that those who are here for the first time, along with everyone else, takes a look at the host of announcements inside the order of service. They are important. They show the life and vitality of this congregation, and certainly worth memorizing or writing down in your date book. Let me just bring a couple of things to your attention. First, I think everybody is aware that we are in transition, kind of a leadership transition in religious education, and our great, fabulous Director of Religious Education, Mary Crona Ekstrand, will be leaving at the end of this year, and she will be succeeded by Julie Miller. And Julie is going to be present tomorrow night at our family fun gathering. And that is a wonderful evening where families that have little ones virtually from birth until 5th or 6th grade gather for dinner at 6 o'clock. Dinner is provided, and then we have a program, and it's over at 7:30. So Julie essentially is going to be our program. And if you have little ones and you've been wondering about the Family Fun Night, we usually have about 25 to 30 families and their kids. Please join us. There's always plenty to eat and a good chance to meet Julie Miller. Also want to mention that our high school group have really come up with, I think it's just a wonderful and a novel way to raise money. On Saturday, May 16th, they're going to have a coffee house here, and it's going to feel like a real coffee house from back in the good old days. And they have very cleverly arranged for many magnificent groups to perform. It's going to be a jazz group, a folk group, and even, how many of you saw the cabaret that we had here? The cabaret singers are going to be there as well. Thank you, David. Did you know that you were going to be there? Yeah. So Laurie Shields is in Elliott Hall, prepared to register you for this wonderful, register is not the right word, but to collect your money. I wanted to say that a little more gracefully. It's $8, your prepay is $8, it's $10 at the door. It runs, and you're not bound to be there for the entire 4 hours. It's come and go as you please, listen to some music, help our kids out. It runs from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. It will be a lot of fun, and the music, and I know some of these groups very well, will be excellent. So please mark your calendars from that. And then come back to church on the 17th, or maybe we can provide a cot here and you can sleep over. The 17th is a very important Sunday, as we will honor those people in our congregation who died in the previous year, and we do that with the choir singing a requiem, and it's pull all the stops out. It is a fabulous program, and they're doing the Rudders, am I right? Rudders Requiem, and that's always a very special event. I think that's all the announcements I have. The offering today is going to be a little bit different. We are, as a congregation, extremely generous in helping the community at large. Twice a year, we take a collection where all the funds go exclusively to help members of our congregation who are in an emergency situation. And today is such a Sunday. So please note, and please be as generous as you can, the monies today go for members in this church to help them when they face a period of darkness in their lives, and it is of enormous help. This program's been going out for about 10 months, and your generosity has made a lot of things possible. The offering will now gratefully be received and a chance to greet one another and bid each other good morning. The first Sunday in May, 1975, exactly 40 years ago, I delivered a sermon to the search committee of what would ultimately become my first call to the ministry. I was a week shy of turning 26, a month shy of graduating seminary, and have no memory, no memory at all of even the subject matter, which I addressed that spring morning in the neutral pulpit of Woburn, Massachusetts. I do remember the reading, however, which was the same one I used this morning. But the sermon is gone from my head and fortunately gone from my files because it really wasn't very good. I remember the distinguished minister of Harvard's Memorial Church, Peter Gomes, who also served as the Plummer Professor of Christian Morals at Harvard Divinity School. I remember his uttering, most disparagingly, that ministers ought to use the sermons of their first 5 years for kindling. And that they owed their congregation during those torturous years both profound gratitude and a petition for forgiveness. Now, I'm going to spare you the stories of how I and my other young colleagues proved Peter Gomes to be absolutely right. I do remember, however, after preaching my first sermon to the congregation, which would be then in September of 1975, I remember my fright upon hearing from these very kind and warm parishioners, "See you next Sunday." It somehow failed to dawn on me that I would have to do this again, real soon, in fact, which would prove very difficult because I had just finished telling them everything I know. So 40 years have passed rather quickly, and I still on occasion wish I could take back a sermon or two or burn a couple. Yet the wisdom on the ecclesiastical streets has it that any minister really only has but one sermon. Now, of course, that one sermon can be dressed in a variety of ways, but kind of like, the same door that has varying degrees of being open or closed, it still always swings on that same hinge. And after a number of years, it'd be wise to get a little WD-40 to keep that door from groaning, like you want to keep a sermon from groaning, but there's only one. Now, I don't like the premise, but I am ready to confront, the possibility that for all these years, I've had but one sermon, one message, one perspective that was unleashed on a kind and unsuspecting congregation, too polite, perhaps, to notice. While away for a little sabbatical leave time these past few weeks, I wrestled with, for me, this very difficult question. What has been my one sermon? I believe that for 4 decades now, what I've really have done from the pulpit and all the days between Sundays, what I've really done is to wrestle with the concept of freedom afforded the human species. Now, especially those of us endowed with privilege we are basically unfettered in how we choose to live our lives. And so the question becomes, what choices do we make that may be considered passionate, compassionate, and justice-seeking? Or do we just use our freedom recklessly as we walk through each day, unconcerned about an accountability to the other in society? From a theological perspective, freedom, this vast amount of freedom, this freedom can only be understood as inextricably tied to responsibility. That, yeah, we've got all this freedom, we can do what we choose, but it's also connected to leading our lives responsibly. That divine spark in each of us that Emerson wrote about, this divine spark works actually in very mysterious ways by calling us to accept a responsibility to make the world more just. Or to pose the question more religiously, to what degree do we feel compelled to respond to those who experience life's injustice? Is it sufficient? Is it okay to lead our lives freely and fully for our own gratification? You know, the old saying, just come around once, might as well make the best use of it. I think it's only fair to conclude, along with old prophets and contemporary ones, that freedom, what's that freedom that we have? That freedom, without regard for any attendant responsibility, becomes an abuse of freedom. Let me just repeat that line one more time because it's really pivotal to what I've been thinking about. Freedom, without regard for any attendant responsibility, becomes an abuse of freedom. For human beings individually and collectively, no limits to human freedom are imposed. As the Unitarian theologian and social ethicist James Luther Adams makes really clear, if any limit is imposed on human freedom, then it simply is not freedom. Everything is allowed. How chilling that is when you think about it. Everything is allowed. So we can readily see how society can fall apart if we fail to assume any responsibility for the welfare of others. Without responsibility, then freedom, the abuse of freedom, runs amok. Everything is allowed. We're capable of dropping atomic bombs. We're capable of a Holocaust. We're capable of racism. We're capable of spectacular self-indulgence and opulent lifestyles in the face of increasing poverty. We are capable of killing species, destroying the earth, precluding a future for our children by choosing to cling to present-day riches based on the extraction of fossil fuels. Why? Why do we do that? Why do we continue to live like that? Because we are free to do so. Everything is allowed. With no responsibility, this freedom is simply abused. If the clergy only have one sermon, and Jesus was a rabbi, well, didn't he keep pretty much to one topic when you think about it? It's always been about owning more responsibility in our lives so that this blessed freedom must be tempered with an awareness of the plight and suffering within the whole human family. And Jesus had a lot to say about this. Stuff about the widow and the orphan and the hungry and those in prison. Our obligations, one might say, are to those who have so little and for whom survival is continuously at risk. And Jesus even composed a sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, in which he comments about our greed, lust, and violence. But he makes one absolutely amazing statement in that sermon. What he says is that we must be perfect just like God is perfect. So you imagine all the listeners there, he says, I want you all to be perfect just like God is perfect. Wow. What does he mean by that? Well, I think that what he's saying is that we should love the way God loves without partiality. And so I think that this concept of pure goodness and mercy, radical love and justice, which he calls God, actually demands of us that we live our lives 100% responsibly. And to live in such a manner, 100% of you is responsible for the welfare of others. He says that is perfection. Then human suffering will cease. Jesus said he wanted perfection. He didn't say, well, I want you to live with about, 40% compassion, 72% selflessness. Try to love, maybe a third of your enemies. He had one sermon, and he was going for the whole enchilada. Perfection. Be responsible. Since I'm no Jesus, nor do I know any other clergy person who could come close, my one sermon is not about perfection, but more about making sure we see the whole picture. Making sure we don't get overly self-absorbed, making sure we are mindful enough to make sure that we ourselves do not abuse, at least not too much, that we don't abuse this freedom, that we do act responsibly. Now, does my one sermon sometimes touch the political? How can it not? When legislators, local, federal, attempt to shirk any responsibility towards those who have so little in order to improve the lot of the super rich. And surely my one sermon hopes to include a framework for a more compassionate life. We should broadly benefit the world. But I would also add how important it is for us to be mindful as much as possible so we don't disregard a thing. Don't disregard a thing. Remember that to regard something means to look again. Baltimore erupted this past week, but look again, will you? Look again at the whole picture and see the history of neglect, poverty, oppression, racism, classism. We have to pay attention. To look again, if need be, in order to fully understand the complete picture. Now, it's not as easy as it sounds because, frankly, we're all pretty busily absorbed in our own work, our own lives, our own endeavors to notice fully what is really going on. Now, let me give you an image that makes this clear. The Renaissance Dutch artist Peter Bruegel, the elder, painted a absolutely masterful painting called The Fall of Icarus. Now, you may recall the myth where Icarus and his father had been imprisoned in a labyrinth on the island of Crete. And to enable Icarus to escape, the father made some artificial wings, which he attached to his son with wax. But Icarus flew so close to the sun that the wax melted, and consequently, Icarus fell, plunging down right into the Aegean Sea. So let's take a look at that painting. Okay, here it is. Almost 2/3 of it on this side, you'll see a kind of a lovely bucolic setting, kind of a mountainside. And there is a farmer plowing the field with his horse. And then over a little bit more, you'll find a shepherd tending the sheep. And then about the last third or so, maybe a little less, there's the Aegean Sea. There's the water. Okay. On that water is quite an exquisite, beautiful ship that's sailing by. And you go, wow, okay, that's a lovely landscape, seascape. That's great. But look again. There in the bottom right-hand corner, about this big, is Icarus, about to splash into the water, bum first. Icarus has just fallen into the sea, and his cry of distress remains unheeded. Normal life is going on around him. People are too busy to notice that Icarus had fallen from the sky and will drown. Now, this painting had quite an effect on the poet W.H. Auden, who penned the following poetic observation, maybe even a commentary. This was his take on the painting. W.H. Auden. Everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The plowman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him, it was not an important failure. The sun shone as it had to on the white legs disappearing into the green water. And the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. So both the painting and the poem combine to warn a preoccupied humanity, warn us all in how myopically we live following our daily routines, and the danger being that we can miss an amazing occurrence, like a boy falling from the sky and drowning. You know, I thought of this just this last week when Alec Baldwin, as a virtual caricature of complacency, but he wasn't acting. Alec got stuck in a New York City cab in Midtown Manhattan during the protest of thousands of fast food employees, health aides, and other low-wage workers, which brought traffic to a halt. Alec Baldwin had somewhere to get to. And as he sat there, the back of the cab, he tweeted some nasty comments about the demonstrators. But Alec, regard the whole picture. Look again. Look and see, right there, the very bottom of the right-hand part of the canvas. There's a mom with 3 boys working at McDonald's for $9 an hour. Can't you see the splash she's making while she's drowning? The point of the demonstration is not to sail calmly on. Well, who really knows how valid the claim that the clergy have but one sermon? I hope that's not the case for my sanity and for yours as well. If it's true that the clergy follow in pretty much the grand tradition of one sermon, we follow in the footsteps of Old Testament prophets who kept griping about the same thing over and over again, failing to advocate for social justice. And then, of course, Jesus had that one sermon, but at least, he kind of spiced it up now and again with some imaginative parables, and that kind of made it easiest for us to tolerate. But perhaps the greatest minister in the 20th century, Reinhold Niebuhr, minister of Detroit, 1940s, 1950s, sounded mostly one note, one sermon, one idea when he said, and he said this so many times in so many ways, his words, he talked about our inclination towards injustice. So he praised humanity, all the good stuff, but he always warned us about our inclination towards injustice. And I think that's really kind of a reworking of the theme that we have complete freedom, everything is allowed, and we abuse that freedom with an irresponsible disregard for the whole picture. We fail to notice. That's one way of saying we fail to notice. But Niebuhr would say, that's too kind of an interpretation. Because according to Niebuhr, he sees humanity as more spiteful than that. He doesn't see it as simply failing to notice. But he claims that we, and again his words, defend, perhaps too eagerly, unjust privileges. Maybe he's right. Isn't that the landscape of our nation today, eagerly defending unjust privileges? So the sermon this morning, at least, is that people fall into the sea every day, and they are relegated to a postage-size corner on the life canvas. We continue to till the soil. We continue to tend the flock. We have somewhere to get to, and so we sail calmly on. So be it. Can we close our service turning our hymn books, please, to number 318? As we extinguish the chalice, may we go forth with new strength, devoted to the love which heals all wounds and to the courage that casts out all fear. May we carry on, move on, go forth, full of hope, a hope that never dies. Amen.